Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, some sad ones. Let's do it. What is your life trauma? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. That my father is an alcoholic, and he used to abuse me both mentally and physically. We've gotten into fights before. Come to find out, he didn't even want me, and I was a mistake. Such a familiar story. I was abused physically and emotionally from my mother and her ex-husband all growing up. CPS didn't help me. I was also SA'd from my grandfather and grandmother when I was really young and pretended like it never happened. I cut all of them off, and because of that, my siblings don't want anything to do with me. Now I'm in my late 20s, finally receiving help, therapy, and psychiatrist on meds for my depression, anxiety, and found out I have PTSD. Hope it gets easier. My wife died from MS-related complications in our bed. She was 43 and I had to call EMS while doing chest compressions. I still carry blame that I couldn't do enough and I was practically a zombie for a long time. I learned to move forward, but I will always carry that guilt. I was 25 weeks pregnant with my third baby, a little girl. My NIPT screening for the more common trisomies came back low risk. My doctor skipped my 12-week scan because I guess he thought a clear NIPT made it unnecessary. He said everything looked fine at my 20-week anatomy scan, but that he couldn't get a good view of the 4 chambers of her heart. He scheduled me to come back at 24 weeks for another scan, which he canceled, so I wasn't seen until 25 weeks pregnant. At that appointment, he said her heart looked fine, but that he couldn't see a nasal bone, and that while everything else looked normal, I needed to see maternal fetal medicine to rule out a chromosomal disorder. I freaked out, and I insisted on being seen ASAP. I called my husband, who didn't answer because he was in a work meeting. He hadn't come along because I assumed this repeat scan was just more formalities. An hour later, I was at a maternal fetal medicine getting my anatomy scan redone. I was alone, crying on the table with my eyes closed because it was taking too long, and the sonographer was taking so many pictures. I knew something was wrong. My husband got my message and must have flown to the office. He came in as soon as they were finishing up the scan. The doctor came in with a tissue box and went through the list of all the things wrong with my baby and told us that she had some sort of genetic disorder because so many things were wrong. Her face had a cleft down the middle so that her eyes were set far apart on either side of her head, and she had no nose. The blood vessels around her heart were all jumbled up and narrowed, and she had a cyst in the 4th ventricle of her brain. I couldn't believe it. I kept hoping to wake up and that it was all a nightmare. I thought this would be the end of me, and I just wanted to give up and die right there. My husband and I just collapsed onto each other and sobbed. Before conceiving our first child, we had a discussion about what we would do if there were serious things wrong with a pregnancy. I never thought we would actually have to act on it, especially not this late. We both knew what we would have to do. Before we left, we had some blood drawn and an amniocentesis to start some testing. The doctors had no idea what they were seeing. Since I was already so far along in my pregnancy, I scheduled my appointment with the abortion clinic while I waited for the results. The longer I waited, the harder it would be to find a place to do the abortion, and the more expensive it would be. Even if the test came back normal, we would still end the pregnancy because her defects were so severe. I'm lucky I live in a state that allows abortion later on for medical reasons, and that I happen to live about 30 minutes away from one of the few clinics in the country that perform abortions so late. I had to wait about 2 weeks for my appointment. I only left the house to go 2 appointments with the genetic counselor. I stopped wearing maternity clothes and opted for loose, baggy t-shirts and gym shorts. All the while I felt my very loved but very sick daughter kicking, and my belly seemed to really start to pop. It was so cruel that things that should have brought me so much joy became the source of such anguish. I barely fed myself. The day of the appointment arrived. I was 27 weeks pregnant. It was going to be a 3-day process, and we had to pay the full $8,000 up front. I want to punch anyone who says abortion is the easy way out right in the face. We sat in the car for a few minutes and I placed my hands on my belly and told her I loved her and was so sorry. I was so sorry she was sick. I was so sorry I had to choose to end her life before it even began. That if I made another choice, she and my family would suffer. We went into the clinic through the back door so we could avoid the protesters. There were about 10 people in the waiting room. One couple there was like us, far along into their pregnancy and just sobbing. I still think about them sometimes and wonder how they're doing. Dilators were placed in my cervix and I received a shot through my belly and into my baby to stop her heart. I told her I loved her and that I was sorry the entire time. 2 days later, I was induced. I birthed my sweet little girl like I did my other children. But instead of the cries of a newborn, there was just silence. My husband held my hand on my right and a nurse my hand on my left. I remember the silence and then the nurse saying, "Oh honey, you made the right choice." She was an angel. Everyone at the clinic was. We made the decision to see my daughter after she was born. I was scared because I knew her face was affected. I was too chicken shit at the time to look at her ultrasound pictures, so I didn't know exactly what to expect. The doctor told my husband that he might want to take some pictures, which was odd because the clinic didn't allow phones or cameras. He went to the car and came back, and they brought my little girl in. She was laying in a basket like a living baby, but she had a sheet covering her. As soon as I lifted the sheet up, my husband and I just sobbed. I remember being instantly horrified at her condition and thankful that I had the choice not to bring her into this world in that body. I feel so bad for my shock toward my own daughter. We sat with her for a little while, and I kissed her and told her how much I love her. Then we went home. I left unpregnant, but this time with no baby in the car seat behind us. She was taken to the funeral home to be cremated, and I would pick her up in a few days. It has been a little under 3 years. I now have a little boy who's going to turn 2 next month, as well as my 5 and 7-year-old. I have an angel wing pendant with a bit of her ashes around my neck at all times, and her footprints tattooed on my calf. I eventually found out what her disorder was, and understanding it helped me be at peace with how she looked. I actually was the one to diagnose her after weeks of researching and then testing for that specific gene. She had acromelic frontal nasal dysatosis, one of the 22 known cases in the world. Horror has been replaced by love. I love my lost daughter as I love my 3 living children, and I can't imagine life without her little brother. The grief remains, but it has become just another part of who I am. There is also anger. Anger at the universe, or God, or whoever that made this happen. Anger at my OBGYN, who somehow missed all of her problems. Anger at people who label me a murderer, and would have forced my child to live a short life full of pain. Anger at politicians, who want to take the choice away from me and other people. Someday, I'll turn that anger into action, but life is busy right now. I'm usually pretty good nowadays, but I still hate going out in public. Certain things still trigger me, and being around anything to do with pregnancy makes me very uncomfortable. Well, that was one of the hardest reads I've had to do in a while. I had a lump in my throat for about 90% of it. Thank you for sharing, and my heart breaks for what you and your family went through. All the best. I was drugged and sexually aided by a guy I was dating in my early 20s. He was my first serious boyfriend and the first person I ever had sex with. I told him from the beginning that there were some acts I was not comfortable doing. Instead of being understanding or offering to teach me so I could feel more comfortable, he took what he wanted by force. After the relationship ended, I shut myself off from the world for 3 years. I had no friends, no hobbies, and just barely held on a job. I became very angry. I contemplated suicide often. I had convinced myself that I was a terrible person and I hated myself. It ruined any relationships I tried to develop for years afterwards. I've healed so much, but I do still get triggered sometimes. If I'm alone with a man I do not know, I become very nervous and defensive. When I'm out in public, I'm on edge and hyper aware of my surroundings. My sex drive is very low, and there are still some very common sexual acts I just cannot bring myself to do, regardless of whether I want to do them, and I'm very self-conscious about it. Even thinking about it makes me freeze up and panic still to this day. I've been accused of being a boring partner or a prude. What happened to me is always at the back of my mind in some form or another. When I was 16, I was hard by my first boyfriend. I wish I could say it only happened once, but I felt trapped. He was abusive to me in other ways too. He would say cruel things like pointing out my flaws, telling me I was selfish if I didn't do the things he wanted, that I was a bad person and lucky to be with him, that sort of thing. He was also physically aggressive towards me. Although he never hit me, when he was angry at me and I tried to leave, he would grab me so hard by the shoulders that it would leave bruises. He'd scream in my face while holding me like that. He would sometimes do things to scare me, like grab me and pretend he was going to shove me into traffic. The scariest one I can remember is when we went swimming at a lake. We were just relaxing and having a conversation in the water, when he suddenly jumped on me and pushed my head under the water. When he let me back up, I started to say, "What the hell?" But before I could finish, he shoved me back under again. This time I inhaled a lot of water. I was terrified, not knowing how long he would hold me under, or if he'd do it again. As soon as he let me back up, I scrambled back to the dock while he laughed at me. I've been afraid of swimming with other people since then. I stayed in the relationship for about a year. I was afraid to leave because he told me he would kill himself if I left. To make matters worse, my best friend at the time had started to distance herself from me and was spreading false rumors about me to all my other friends. They believed her, and soon I had no friends left. They bullied me relentlessly for the rest of high school. When my best friend found out about the R, she told everyone about it and said I was lying. I'd never even wanted anyone to know. I felt so ashamed, but my boyfriend ended up bragging to people that we had sex, and because of that, I confided in someone I trusted about what had truly happened. That person ended up telling my best friend. I'm honestly not sure how I got through it. I didn't want to live anymore, and I did come close to taking my own life a couple of times. It's now been 10 years, but it still tears me up inside and has completely destroyed my sense of safety and my ability to make new connections. I've only recently started going to therapy for it and have been diagnosed with PTSD, so I guess things may turn around soon. My best friend was diagnosed with ALS and she's going to die. People keep telling me, "Don't say that, God is with you." I hate hearing it. I doubt she will be the 1% miracle human. I would rather she is put out of her misery than live the rest of her life as a vegetable. It's just a strange thought. We will never be able to go out and do dumb teenage stuff ever again. I honestly still don't know how I feel. Visiting her is hard. She can't talk or move much. She gets frustrated that I can't understand her. It's a lot to handle. Having a liver transplant at age 10, liver did not respond well to my body and left me sick. Held out hope I'd get another transplant later in life that would solve how sick the last transplant left me. Got second transplant at 36. Felt great. 2 weeks later, the main artery connecting the heart and liver clotted off and the liver died. Got another liver a week later, after nearly dying waiting. All the suppression to my immune system resulted in cancer growing in my thyroid and metastasizing to my lungs. Well, I dealt with bullying for many years from kids and family. I was almost killed in 8th grade by a gang and had no support, but I don't like to think of these things as trauma because my life right now is in shambles, but I only have myself to blame because I didn't treat my neurological disorder sooner, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. That indecisiveness led to my failure, not bullying. About 2 years ago, I was going to visit my sister. She lives across the country, and I've seen her in forever. She was pretty hyped. I was pretty hyped. I asked my job for some time off, but they said too many people were taking off around that time I wanted, so I could take off at a different date. I told my sister. She was obviously deflated, but said, "It's okay, you can come another time." A week or so later, my dad told me and the brother I lived to come to their apartment. My brother and I were trying to guess why our dad was wanting to meet us there. Also, why he flew from Oregon to Arkansas. We came in, and all the rest of my brothers were sitting there. My dad said I might want to sit down. I was scared, but I said I'd rather stand. He then explained that our sister got in a car accident and died on the scene about 4 days earlier. My mom flew over to where my sister was to ID the body. My legs gave out and I started crying. It didn't make me feel better. So many things were going through my head. I was in a car accident myself a month or two before this and literally walked away unscathed. If I was able to take the time off from work, I would have been there during her car accident. I might even have been in the car when it happened. Would I have been dead too? Would my presence prevent whatever circumstances resulted in her dying? My mom used to tell us stories about when we were really little. My sister was a born talker, but I didn't really start speaking until I was pretty old. My sister used to be my interpreter, saying that I was trying to tell our mom that we wanted cookies and whatnot. She said we have our own secret language, just giggling at each other over nothing. She was my confidant for personal information, and now I don't have any more I can really talk to. Well, if you're an everything happens for a reason person, then there was a reason. Sorry for your family's loss. When I was 9 years old, I was almost kidnapped a block from my house. A van pulled over, and the passenger said, "Hey, come here," and then chased my friend and me. My friend was on his bike and got away easily. I ran for the corner and made it around. Luckily, a neighbor was in their yard on the other side of a large hedge blocking the view of what was happening. The neighbor was deaf and didn't understand what I was upset about. I waited near the neighbor until the kidnappers got back in the van, then I sprinted home, staying shielded from the street by going through people's yards, jumping fences, etc. Flat out sprint during the last few hundred feet without cover to get to my parents' house. The whole time I was running, I was just waiting to see the van turn the corner and figure out where I live. My deaf neighbor very likely saved my life by just being outside. The first trauma was having an emotionally and physically abusive mother who never offered any kind of support or taught how to handle emotions. I was not allowed to show any negative emotions. I was beaten if I did. Then my father committed suicide, after which I started school, didn't do well enough, and was replaced by a little sister, and basically the rest of my care was thrown out the window. Lots of trauma on top of that, but abandonment by both parents as a small child is the basis of it all.